lecturers at the University of Staffordshire. Thank you very much to Seth for the opening speeches, and thank you to all of our scientific committee for their inputs as well. Today, I am going to be presenting you on my work in HADO and the impacts of it in terms of cognitive and behavioural influences. I also will be your host for today's presentations as well. Welcome to Staffordshire University. Usually I would have a lovely presentation available, but because I haven't had my vMix operator today, I'm currently running between a few areas. So I thought I'll give you a little bit of lowdown on the research, make use of our studio a little bit instead of me being behind a screen. I thought I would come in and give you a little bit of open sort of transparency and talk about it. The research I'm currently conducting is looking at the cardiovascular and production values of HADO as a activity to help ASD, so autism spectrum disorder. I first started looking at this about 2 years ago now, when I first started to adopt HADO. HADO is an augmented reality dodgeball fighting game as such. It's a game where you have balls that you can fire at people and you can have shields to block it, etc. And it's a load of dodging and movement capabilities. The research was originally looking at it from being its impact as an esport, and I was lucky enough to represent Wales at the World Cup happened over in summer in Shanghai, China. And I got to compete at the World Championships there and visit China and represent Wales there. We have one facility in the UK. It's based in Coventry. It's the UK HADO Centre. And from there, they have been able to develop it into a community-based sport, has a large audience in terms of the local community. And I was then looking at how that could be introduced as a sports alternative. Right, so the alternative of bringing augmented reality into a sporting context. And at that point, I was looking at some of the limitations and the socioeconomic aspects behind it. HADO is not a very accessible sport. It costs quite a lot of money. And I wanted to sort of break it down into 3 questions that potentially could provide research funding, research opportunities. And this is sort of my pitch to you guys in terms of people who are interested about getting some viewpoints or getting some research out there or putting a grant into place. So I looked at 3 potential outcomes in terms of what I want the research to realistically focus on. The first one was looking at cardiovascular, skeletal disposition, flexibility, and what HADO does in terms of all those. What I would classify as the sporting X points of it. The second bit with what I was looking at was the financial aspects of producing it as a community-based activity. Something not as similar as football or hockey, depending on what part of the world you're in, but something that has centres throughout a population that allows them to have readily available access to HADO as a sporting performance programme. And we were looking at that in terms of introducing it in schools, and that's something that we need to provide further research on and to build it up from there. And finally was what I was finding the most useful aspect, or the thing that I not care most about, but care most about from my personal research point of view, which is looking at the use of HADO to support ASD students who've got autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, or any sort of neurological condition that find barriers to participation within sport very challenging. And that sort of got me to think about where this should sort of be moving forward from. The first thing I realised with this was HADO is a very exclusive sport by its nature. Within Europe, at least, there is only a certain amount of centres. I think there may be less than a dozen centres across mainland Europe and the UK. And it meant that people who were participating at the World Championship weren't necessarily the best, but they were there to represent and try to grow the sport, and that's really important. And that's a lot of what esports is in terms of national levels, right? The idea that we don't always have the best people represent, but it does mean it's the people who can then try to encourage more people to represent. The next thing that I looked at in the primary sort of data was when I was working alongside Coventry or UK HADO and when I went down there a few times, I realised that the population of participants of these children who were coming to world-class level at the time were predominantly people who had autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, or other neurological conditions. And when I was down there coaching and playing, I spoke to a few of their parents, etc., and they said that HADO allows them to get physically active and build up their confidence and their communication skills, but it doesn't feel like the pressures of traditional sports. And someone who has ADHD and autism and loved sport growing up, I didn't really I couldn't really process the fact that autistic people didn't like sport. And then I came back to my university, Staffordshire University, and asked my students who have a range of ASDs or ADHD or other neurological conditions if they enjoy sport, and the vast majority didn't. So I was the oddball in that situation, but I processed it wrong. So I then looked at it in terms of like accessibility, and then I tried to introduce a few different aspects of physical activity which weren't in the same sense as traditional sports. The first one I actually presented 2 years ago at a year ago at our London campus was introducing physical activity for fun, and to use it as a method to analyse player performance outside of their traditional like norms, right? So every year I run a module called multidisciplinary teamwork that I've handed over this year to my colleague Reece Williams, but this uses a week where we dedicate it to doing Ninja Warrior. So I'm sure all of you have watched a hit TV program. It was broadcast in Australia, New Zealand, America, etc., where we had Ninja Warrior as on the TV. And in the UK, we have a lot of what we classify as Ninja Warrior sort of inflatable parks, etc. And that allowed us to get people active in a less traditional sporting sense. And then from there, we can sort of look at it from a cognitive and musculoskeletal workload. And one of the things that I realized within that was it allowed people to make themselves look bad. And because of that, it was something that people were a lot more confident and flexible and being a lot more open about. So that was the first sort of viewpoint that I went through. The next bit I wanted to sort of focus on was the expectations now of esports players in terms of tier 1, tier 2, etc., in introducing physical activity, and HADO can be another input for that, right? The idea that HADO is an opportunity for teams to be developed, players to work towards it, and it's also another way that tier 1 teams can introduce physical activity within those environments, right? A lot of boot camps and etc. don't have a huge amount of space, and HADO only takes up the space of a badminton court. So it's not exactly a huge amount of space to go into. And then the final thing that I've been looking at quite heavily before I go to a small intermittent break, I'm hoping that my guys in the next room can hear me in that, is the fact that we are looking to move HADO from just being in particular centres to being more accessible and variable. When I was in China, in Shanghai, when I was at the World Championships, Asia has done this really, really well, both within Korea and within China as well as Japan, where they have introduced HADO in shopping centres, right? And I've been looking at this quite heavily in terms of another research area of interest of mine is the downfall of shopping malls both within the UK, but also in Europe, but probably most predominant to most people is in North America, right? These shopping malls are massive buildings with a huge amount of square foot space, and shops are dying, traditional shopping experiences are dying. So how can we better use these spaces? And one of the things that I realized when I was out in Shanghai was a few of these different malls had HADO centers or HADO experiences, which allowed players to get sort of hands-on grip and play HADO whilst their parents were out shopping, etc. And that could be something that we could look at to implement. And that would be something that I would be sort of pushing for in terms of research funding, economic development, etc. So although this is going to be relatively short because I am rushing around like a headless chicken, And as you've seen by my little GIF with my flappy head, I'm a little bit busy. I hope that these give you some sort of viewpoints and some sort of thoughts behind it. You can always ask me about any aspects of this research. I'll be answering questions throughout the day, and I'll be asking questions throughout the day as well. But the thing that I want us to really sort of focus on is the fact that if you are interested in this research or want to collaborate in relation to it, because this is at the collaboration stage, feel free to grab my email. It's Cameron.Vanloo at staffs.ac.uk, and I'll be posting it up in a chat where if someone is interested in looking at this particular research. I'm not going to do my questions now, by the way. I will try to do them throughout the day because I've got to go back and do some vision mixing. But I hope that helps, and I look forward to hearing some people's responses. Sorry about my presentation. We had a few technical issues this morning. It wouldn't be esports without them. So Apollo, this is back to you to go to